That was a direct repudiation. So we're no longer going to allow redemption of Federal Reserve notes in gold. And that was the point at which we stepped on to the hyperinflationary roller coaster. That's when we got in the car, down at the bottom, and it started up. And in fact, if you look at graphs of the loss of purchasing power of the currency, from 1971, you begin to see that break going up. You're starting to go up the funicular on the roller coaster to the top. And now we've gotten about 3 or 4 ratchet points away, 3 or 4 clicks away from the top of that roller coaster. So I'd say if I were in Washington, D.C., I'd be looking at this situation, I'd be saying, there's no way out. I should have known that a long time ago. But we were very foolish. We've driven this machine right to the edge of instability. A picture that comes to my mind. I mean, the Federal Reserve System is an automobile with square wheels, to make an engineering analogy. If I have an automobile with square wheels and I drive it long enough, I can expect the differential is going to fall off and the transmission is going to break, the front end is going to fall off after a while. This thing is simply not going to function over the long term. I may put on a new front end and a new differential, but it's going to shake itself to pieces eventually. And at some stage, it's going to shake itself to pieces while I'm trying to do 60 miles an hour and I'm going to crash, right? This is not a safe vehicle. Right? This is a Pinto or a Corvair or whatever, if you will. Right? In an economic sense. I want to change this. At least I want to put some round wheels on it and see if that'll help it, right? They never did it. So now they're facing this problem of a runaway economic engine and social consequences coming out of that. And that's where the Homeland Security point comes in. Because if you have these kinds of social consequences, they'll extend entirely across the country. It won't just hit Detroit. It won't just hit Tampa or Los Angeles. Why? Because the breakdown of the monetary and banking system is going to affect the entire price structure throughout the economy. Everything is going to be thrown in disarray. Even if you didn't have a huge amount of debt overhanging this, you would still generate chaos in the system, because when the currency collapses, what is the price structure going to look like for goods and services? What money are you going to use when Federal Reserve notes have depreciated to zero value? Have a major problem, even if you didn't have the debt overhang. So looking at this from a Homeland Security perspective in Washington, I would be saying to myself, we're going to have a lot of social dislocation that will make the Watts riots or the Los Angeles riots of 1992 look like child's play. How do we deal with this? And as typical bureaucrats, well, we deal with this with a top-down approach. We start giving orders and commands, right? We set up a thing called the Department of Homeland Security, which I do not believe, I'll just tell you this personally, I do not believe the impetus for the Department of Homeland Security had anything whatsoever to do seriously with international terrorism. This thing was set up because they knew they're sitting on a powder keg domestically. Even if you didn't have, even if they had never, the word international terrorism had never been used, this would be here. It was set up to deal with the problem we're now looking at. Now, the difficulty is they don't have enough federal police. The FBI, DEA, ATF, whatever, they just don't have enough. And so they've been trying over the last several years to integrate in the Department of Homeland Security structure, this pyramidal structure, to integrate the state and local police departments. So the state and local police departments will respond to directives coming out of Washington, D.C. Probably that is part of the code red process. It's part of these fusion centers that you've probably read about all over the country. Right? The whole purpose being to create an integrated federal structure in which the lower levels take orders directly from the all-seeing eye in Washington, D.C. But they know that they don't have enough, as the expression goes, boots on the ground, even if they can co-opt all of the state and local police, especially in a national economic catastrophic, if you will, situation, because those state and local police will be worrying about their own families. They'll have a lot of things to do in their own localities that may cause them not to be too interested in taking orders from Washington, D.C. And so we now see the development of trying to integrate the regular armed forces into the Department of Homeland Security process for domestic control. And this is the NORTHCOM operation, which you can read about. That poses an extreme difficulty because once armed forces become part of that domestic political control mechanism, which our Constitution in fact precludes, but once these people in Washington overstep that constitutional limitation and bring the armed forces into that relationship. Historically, in all of the countries where this has occurred, the armed forces never get out. Why? Because politicians first have to depend upon them, right? The whole system is dependent upon them. And number two, the armed forces look at this and they say, wait a minute. If we're going to be shot at because of what these people have been doing, why don't we give the orders? Why should we be listening to their policies? Right? If we're going to be responsible with our own blood for the consequences, we may as well be the directing and controlling influence. And that doesn't mean that we'll necessarily set up a military junta, South American style, where you have half a dozen colonels sitting there behind the microphone saying what's going to happen. We'll still have our political process, but behind the scenes we'll be the ones turning the screws here. Of course, the difficulty is that the military probably even has less competence to run an economic system than the politicians. That's not their business, right? Politicians, at least in theory, they're supposed to be trained to do this. Military are trained to do a completely different thing. But the great danger of it is once they get in, very infrequently, if ever, do they ever get out. Now, the Constitution actually has, as one would expect, the solution to this problem, or at least a direction. On the economic side, we should never have gotten into it in the first place, because the government is supposed to be limited as official might to the use of silver and gold, not paper currency of any kind whatsoever, and certainly not paper currency generated by some kind of private banking cartel. So there's number one. If we could get back to the constitutional monetary system, we could at least prevent this type of problem from arising in the future. I mean, we still have the debt problem to deal with, but we could prevent it from arising in the future, or getting worse. What about the Homeland Security problem? Because I don't think that in terms of the amount of time that we would have before this hyperinflationary event occurs, at the outside, what, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years maybe, that it's likely that you can get the monetary system completely under control again. You can begin to make the first steps in that direction. But it's quite an economic mess. You're going to have a large amount of social dislocation. You're going to have a homeland security, domestic homeland security problem of some kind. How do you deal with that? Well, go to the Constitution, whenever the implement, chainsaw, automobile, washer, dryer, whenever that thing begins to go wrong, what should the owner do? You go to the owner's manual, right? The instruction manual. That's the first thing. Go to the instruction manual, see if you're operating this thing properly before you call the repairman in and pay that extraordinary bill. Maybe you're turning the wrong dial this way. All right, security. Where's the only place in the Constitution of the United States where the word security appears? This is a test. No one's leaving here until you grade it. What's the test?
Second Amendment.
Second Amendment, right. Well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. Okay? And it's interesting that it is the security of a free state, not the security of just any kind of state, not the security of a police state, not the security of a socialist state, right? None of those things. Security of a free state. Where's the only other place in the Constitution where a cognate word, cognate to security, appears? Security is a noun. Tell me where the verb appears. Okay? Preamble to the Constitution. We the people, in order to, what? Secure to ourselves, secure the blessing of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution. So you see that when the Constitution is talking about securing this free state, it's talking in terms of the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So if you have a homeland security operation, I don't like those words, that's Washington's words, but let's just use them because they're so current. If you're talking about a homeland security operation in a constitutional sense, it has to be directed towards a free state in which the blessings of liberty are preserved.